Ladies and gentlemen, it is Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and today we are going to be taking a look at a much requested video. This is Seth's S.T.A.L.K.E.R review, Soviet Survival Simulator. Let's get into it.
People, Sseth here. After a long and healthy life, my old microphone now sounds like this. So, I had to put it down, and I got a condenser mic. I have no idea what I'm doing. Thank you for your patience and understanding. Today, I'll be covering S.T.A.L.K.E.R.
Yep, I know that feeling. Yeah, I had to replace my mic not too long ago, and boy, well, I think it's actually improved considerably, if we're honest.
Shadow of Chernobyl.
Okay, I have absolutely no idea what's going on here. This is obviously real footage, and I'm just so confused. I think this is like a real Soviet bunker.
Actually, I lied. I'll be reviewing all of the S.T.A.L.K.E.R games at once, and the novel this universe is based on, Strugatsky's Roadside Picnic. S.T.A.L.K.E.R's
Whoa, interesting, guys. This is a strange call. So we're going into the whole S.T.A.L.K.E.R lore and the original book it's based on. That's actually pretty wild. I'm into it.
Anomalies is very simple. You play as a delinquent gopnik who's just broken into a fenced-off exclusion zone in Chernobyl, Ukraine, which is actually based on a fictional country here in Europe. If the legends are true, the mythical nation of Ukraine produces most of the bootleg cigarettes and prostitutes we find in Europe today. But everyone knows this is just a fairy tale. However, in this
Okay, it's actually really sad that he alludes to that, because when I lived in Italy, outside my apartment building were two very attractive women from somewhere in Eastern Europe who were very obviously dressed for work. And next to them were two extremely shady looking 50-year-old, well, gopniks basically, who were supervising the women, we'll say. It was really weird, but what was even weirder was that you would see routinely the Italian police just roll by these women like they did not care that there was obvious prostitution and PIMPs hanging out there watching them. I don't know. I have no idea what YouTube's terms of service allude to this, but this is a real story. Nothing bad happens. But that's it. So the point is that he may be spot on.
world, there was no nuclear meltdown, nor any subsequent cover-up by the infallible, benevolent Soviet Union. Instead of nuclear fallout, we have an expanding circle of land where the laws of physics don't apply, filled with all manner of strange anomalies and mutated wildlife that wants to kill you. Why did you come here? No one knows. Thousands of men serving hundreds of interest groups have come before you. What makes your ideology any different? Some claim they want to contain it, others study or even protect it from the outside world. In truth,
so here's something really interesting that I always love when you have games that talk about all these different factions at war with each other. So the best real-world analog that I can draw from that talks about this is actually the Syrian civil war, right? You notice that early on it was Assad and against, well, most of his people. This happened around 2010. And what happened is that the civil war was so brutal and it began to like break a lot of things apart. And you also had external forces begin to fund their own sort of, I'm going to call them like pet groups. The CIA funded, for example, pro-liberal democracy factions. But the DOD actually funded a different pro-Assad or anti-Assad forces that were opposed to, terror groups who were funded in turn by places like Saudi Arabia. The Iranians funded groups. The Russians actually backed Assad. Hamas was fighting for a time. There were Russian special forces on the ground in combat. U.S. special forces were in Syria for a time, the Ranger Regiment. So you had absolute chaos. The Kurds were in Syria. So you had absolute chaos within this country. It had been basically broken apart and shattered into a million pieces. And then all these factions began to fight each other. But what I think is really important to understand is that fighting is resource intensive. And it's hard to just feed a group of a few hundred or a few thousand people in a failed state, let alone feed, equip, treat, move, give them water, places to rest, places to use the bathroom, right? These are really complicated problems, and solving all of them is like what most human beings in pre-industrial society spent their entire lives doing. So what you need to do is have someone else backing you, funding you, giving you resources. So if you see a situation where they talk about lots of different factions that are competing with one another actively, there's usually a sign that there are several different external factors using these factions as proxies.
There is no single rational answer. We have no reason to be here, but we're drawn to it, fascinated by it, and afraid of it. But no matter what, we can't resist its siren call. Welcome to the Zone. The Zone, while physical in the games, is more of a metaphorical concept. The Zone represents our anxious and often fatal curiosity, our hopes and dreams, and ultimately, our darkest desires. Rumors of the Zone spread throughout our planet. Talk of mutants, weird events, and bizarre artifacts that defy our understanding begin to haunt everyone's imagination. And of course, the promise of treasure beyond your wildest dreams. S.T.A.L.K.E.R is like the discovery of a new world. Everyone wants to go out into the great unknown and give smallpox to the Aztecs, and maybe even leave behind several dozen illegitimate mutant children which now lack a father. This is Sseth reminding you that being a deadbeat dad isn't cool, even if your son is a malformed, hideous abomination and an insult to God's earth. Take responsibility and kill him yourself. Yes.
Okay, I want to point something out here, and this is a really important distinction. If you can do it, it is natural. Right? There are some things that the world will not permit us to do. Accelerate faster than the speed of light. Fuse atoms in certain weird ways, certain types of atoms, right? There's some things that you just physically, it won't let you do. Everything else is a product of the natural world. For example, right? You may think bananas. Bananas are a natural food, and banana-flavored candy is not natural. Well, here's the thing, guys. The bananas are the product of hundreds of years of genetic engineering. Through constant selective breeding, we bred the banana to look and taste a certain way. And to make things even weirder, all bananas are actually clones of exactly one type of banana, which means that if there were to be a particularly vicious banana parasite, which actually has kind of shown up now, or plague of some kind, that every one of those genetically identical bananas would be absolutely devastated by it. So, is a banana really more natural than banana candy, which is just sugar cane and some other, flavoring added? It's maybe a wash, right? So the point is that if you can create something, there's nothing unnatural about these things, right? We as human beings, and frankly, the people that sell you products want to convince you that there's a really bright line, like natural good, unnatural bad. But if that were true, then surely we would see ancient humans from hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, their all-natural diet and highly active lifestyle would have enabled them to live significantly longer than us standard humans, but that's not really the case. They lived short lives with vicious injuries and constant problems. I mean, you look at the skeleton of Otzi the Iceman, a 5,000-year-old herder. He is just a litany. He was like 40 and had just arthritis everywhere. Don't live in this like natural-unnatural dichotomy. It's not true.
As for the gameplay itself, it's a sandbox survival shooter, and it plays very tightly for a shooter. Most of the guns feel really good. When you're not shooting, you'll be exploring and investigating the world, avoiding anomalies and trying to get those sweet, sweet artifacts that justify the health risk. The zone has its own black market economy of selling artifacts back to governments, research groups, and private collectors. Sadly, you're at the bottom end of this lucrative pipeline. You're like a cocaine farmer in Colombia. Your life is short, miserable, and underpaid, and you're easily replaceable. The average artifact typically goes for about $20 on the black market, barely enough to restock your ammunition and buy some typical Slavic cuisine: canned tuna, kielbasa, and stale bread.
First off, that sounds like a great combo. But here's the fascinating thing with the math. Now, this is actually spot on in terms of math. Why? Because when you look at the chain of custody through drugs, and trust me, I did a lot of counter-drug in Afghanistan because of the opium, I actually found out the math behind it. And the answer is, for most popular street drugs, fentanyl's a little different because it's made in a lab, but cocaine and heroin, right, that are high demand, basically add a zero every time the cocaine or heroin moves through the refining process. So the coca farmers, for example, God, I'm going to get demonetized for this. Coca farmers going to get, let's make these numbers up, but the scale is right, the numbers are made up. Let's say they get $1 per kilogram of leaves. Well, then someone does the basic refinement of coca leaves, right? Turns it into coca paste, and they turn it into $10 per kilogram. Those guys send it to the next level of refinement where they really get it down to like an unrefined, like a proto cocaine. They're going to get $100 a kilogram, and as it moves through the cycle of refinement, packaging, and then each step of transport, right? Getting it to the US border is going to add, suddenly it's up to $1,000 a kilogram. Then when it moves across the US border, it's up to $10,000 a kilogram. And then you get to the point where a kilogram of cocaine, that's how it can be worth $100,000, is because when it's finally distributed, packaged, put in its little baggies and sold, that's when, on a per kilogram basis, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? This is how these sort of illegal black markets work. This is why they're so hard to quash out, right? Imagine if you could grow maize or corn or soybeans for, a dollar, a half or a third of what coca pays. And why would you not earn that extra zero, right? There's almost no reason. Why would you be a farmer at all when you could run a refining operation where you receive raw materials, you pay $1 a kilogram for raw materials, and you ship out something that is $10 a kilogram for a refined product? So the point is that this is totally normal within this. Probably if you were to trace these fictional artifacts through the chain of custody, by the time they end up in the hands of the stalker version of Mark Zuckerberg, some elite collector, he's probably paying several zeros more. So $20 to the actual collector, assuming it changes hands 5 times, you're talking about $20,000 to $200,000 for these things.
And of course, Monster Energy Zero Ultra, the USSR drink of choice. For added immersion, I recommend eating S.T.A.L.K.E.R cuisine in real life. Luckily, my house has all of the aforementioned dishes. My bread is just a little bit more fragrant than the zone's. For even more immersion, you can try going outside. Who knows what sort of artifact lookalikes you'll find. Oh look, a gravy, and here's a stone blood, and here's a used hypodermic needle. These only appear in the extremely rare Junkie Crack Den anomaly. How curious. For Westerners, S.T.A.L.K.E.R is a game about surviving a harsh, unforgiving place where there's no one to help or rescue you, human contact is limited, and you're left isolated from the outside world. For Slavs, S.T.A.L.K.E.R is a simulation of everyday life, surviving a harsh, unforgiving place where there's no one to help or rescue you, human contact is limited, and you're left isolated from the outside world. How accurate you want to sim-
I mean, unfortunately, you look at some of the news in places like Ukraine, especially the Donbas, the LNR, where there's a really, really limited governmental functions, and you realize that he might be onto something.
Simulation to be is based on the...
There's also places like Transnistria, which is a semi-recognized territory, I think next to Moldova. But that also has a similar problem, right? By not being recognized really by any state, it's like an administrative and legal gray zone.
difficulty you pick. Ah yes, the 4 genders: Rookie, Stalker, Veteran, and Master. Lowering the difficulty results in more mutations in the people, as they develop genetic adaptations to bullet fire and employment. For this reason, it's completely fine to learn the game on Stalker difficulty, but if you find that firefights take too long, I recommend bumping it up to Master. It's a strange way to do difficulty, but it makes sense once you're comfortable with the mechanics. If you're interested in playing all the games, the natural order would be Shadow of Chernobyl, Call of Pripyat, and then Clear Skies. If you only have time for one of them, play Pripyat. If you want even more, install Call of Chernobyl. It links every game map, and you can play as any faction, including bandits. It also removes almost all English voice acting from the game, which is far more fitting to the atmosphere, as there's many words to describe the average Russian, and bilingual is not one of them, despite how hostile the zone.
I wonder how frequent being multilingual is in Russia. Obviously, if you've spent more than 15 minutes in Europe, you know basically everyone speaks great English, and you feel like a trashy, degenerate American when you can barely order a taco in Spanish.
Zone is, it can also be quite comfy. Sitting around the campfire with other stalkers and listening to them play guitar and tell jokes in Russian is a very pleasant and homey experience, and gives you temporary relief from the choking isolation and dread you'll feel everywhere else. Admittedly though, bandit camps have some of the best music. Unsurprisingly,
what's always interesting is that, one, this is spot on, right? When I was in Afghanistan, this was one of those feel-good moments between patrols. You would stop at a Afghan police station where they would actually sometimes even have people in the towers. Otherwise, you would just go up to the towers yourselves. But you could spend, have only 3 or 4 people in your platoon on security because of the great vantage point the towers kind of gave you and the fact that there were walls and barbed wire everywhere. And you could just relax. We would actually do exactly what he's describing. We would buy some firewood, start a little fire. We would buy food from the local markets. Sometimes we even buy live chicken skin and eat them. And it really does feel good to just be able to relax a little bit when you have to get up in, a couple hours and go back and patrol again.
this game is pretty fucking spooky at times. The mutants of the zone grunt, squeal, and lunge at you with a moment's notice, and they have a habit of doing it whenever your guard is down. Luckily, some of the most dangerous mutants are extremely rare.
In a perfect world, men like me would not exist.
This is so weird. I can't tell if this is Sseth or the actual mutant.
But this is not a perfect world.
Alright, spooky Russell Brand, I guess?
But surviving an encounter with one of them will leave you shaken and traumatized. Call of Pripyat is the most developed of the free titles. Hunting for artifacts becomes more than just platforming and throwing screws at vibrating pockets of air. You now have different devices to help you spot and locate artifacts invisible to the human eye, which now also appear inside and around the formation of different anomalies. One wrong move and you'll be torn apart, shocked, or incinerated. Luckily, some of the anomalies are much more benign and harmless than others.
Mark 1. What the hell?
In Call of Pripyat, they also added emissions. Emissions exist to make you shit your pants and disrupt whatever plans you had. These are incredibly violent energy storms originating from the Chernobyl National Power Plant. And if you receive a warning that a blowout's about to happen, you better get the fuck inside unless you want to die a horrible, horrible death. Anything and anyone who can't get to cover on time will be fried to a crisp. And
FYI guys, if you ever find yourself in a real-world natural disaster or storm, like a tornado or hurricane, what you want to do is get away from your windows and doors, right? The reason is because they're giant holes in your house, and they're made of sharp debris, right? They're sort of like a window is just glass that hasn't cut you yet, right? So what you want to do is get somewhere safe and interior. Ideally, you want it also somewhere interior to your house is likely to have a little more superstructure over it, so that if things start blowing or tearing in your house, you're more likely to be all right. The popular recommendation is your bathtub with your mattress over it. That can form a pretty hard shell that can keep you relatively safe, and also bathrooms generally don't have windows. You can also look at a laundry room or anywhere else that's going to be internal to your house. just a little piece of survival advice in case things get real stalkery real fast here in the real world.
And that's if you're lucky. For those who weren't so lucky, they'll get back up and continue their routine as a hollow, unresponsive husk. The anomalies described in the book are much less forgiving. Accidentally rub against a transparent strand of web, you'll die from a heart attack hours later. Were you near the zone when the visitors came, you're forbidden from ever leaving, and you'll be shot on sight if you dare try, because whatever city you'll go to will be devastated by natural disasters until you die. The games and the book also diverge heavily in plot, since in Strugatsky's Roadside Picnic, the title of the book says it all. Visitors stopped by our world and left as quickly as they arrived, leaving behind their trash and waste, the remains of a messy picnic. But their trash is our treasure. Everything in the zone is fantastical and beyond our comprehension.
That is actually pretty funny. I love that plot device. We forget that, the scale of human beings, so the analogy to cosmic horror that I really like is human beings. Imagine you're an ant, right? And so imagine the things that we as human beings do that are just random encounters that happen to ants. Let's say, for example, I pull my phone out of my pocket and I have a receipt there and it falls down next to an anthill. To an ant, a megalith has spawned randomly in front of their house, right? And it smells different. It's made of a material that seems like it shouldn't even exist to these ants who live their lives in underground dirt. And they investigate it, right? Now imagine for a brief moment that the ants could somehow understand that I am a larger creature who is 100,000 times as smart as that ant, and that what I have dropped on their house is not a megalith of great meaning, but an accident that I have not even thinking, and that what they have is a receipt from me getting a hamburger at McDonald's. That they have been blessed with something that is so trivial to me, so meaningless to my life, and yet is the single greatest thing that could ever happen to them. It must be, if they could somehow understand that, it would destroy their tiny ant minds. That, you wonder if something like that were to happen to human beings with a comparably godlike creature, how would we respond? Probably something like
Room temperature superconductors, invasive species of cotton, which exclusively grow on metal surfaces, and infinite batteries, which asexually reproduce, are just some of the wonders left by the visitors, who are so impossibly more advanced than us that we couldn't even catch a glimpse of what they are. In Stalker, the zone is a man-made disaster through some psychic pseudoscience bullshit, which I honestly suspect is just an excuse to make you go through the worst linear sections of a game, because Ivan spent a lot of time making those 3D models, and by God, you're gonna appreciate it. To summarize briefly, a bunch of scientists merged their brains together to form the Sea Consciousness, a superior consciousness capable of changing the planet's novosphere, an informational field surrounding Earth, in order to remove negative emotions like anger, greed, and being a foot fetishist. Their interference spawned the zone, which...
Okay, gotta point this out, guys. Only someone as deluded as a career academic could believe that greed is useless, right? Now, don't get me wrong, right? We all seethe and cope with Jeff Bezos being a gazillion times richer than us and having the equivalent of, what is it, like, if he earned $10,000 a day since the pyramids were built, he still wouldn't have as much money as he has now. Like, okay, Jeff Bezos is not working 100 billion times harder than me. He's not 100 billion times smarter than me, or you, right? But he somehow has made himself worth 100 billion times smarter. So I think it's fair to say that, yes, at some sort of scale, greed becomes destructive. But fundamentally, in a free market economy, the greed, when constrained by like pro-social regulation, is a tremendously powerful force, right? Humans' basal drives, greed, reproduction, drive tremendous growth when it's like a car, right? You can have greed, lust, pride. These are powerful emotions that drive human behavior, that human beings will die based on these emotions. So when you have them, they're so powerful, but it's like dropping a Porsche engine into a VW van, right? You're basically, the van is going to be destroyed and be literally dangerous to operate. But if you build the right scaffolding, the right environment, you can channel that energy. If you drop the Porsche engine into a Porsche, right, it's going to have the right tires, the right center of gravity, the right weight distribution. All those things are going to work together to make it go and make it a powerful car instead of just a dangerous one. And this is what greed can be, right? At the end of the day, everyone who built the first iPhone, right, something that was a technological leap forward in, at least in terms of commercial and telecommunications. Everyone who built the first smartphone was motivated at their core by greed. If they had stopped getting paid, they would have stopped working on it. But it only works when you have proper regulation, because unchecked greed, right, if it will result in all sorts of crazy things. They'll destroy the environment. They will harm the workers and people around them, right? Like human greed is almost like too powerful. So you have to have these constraints that make sure that it's channeled only in building new iPhones or inventing new productive things or building something great that people will love, and not spent, stealing and scamming old ladies and running crypto pump and dumps.
Has been expanding ever since. To make matters worse, their efforts backfired. Foot fetishes were instead replaced by scat, and that extremely specific category of porn where the camera keeps zooming in to the guy's taint. Realizing what evil they've unleashed on the world, the scientists are now actively trying to contain the zone. In Shadow of Chernobyl, you can either help or kill them. In Clear Skies, you get brainwashed by them. In Call of Pripyat, you meet S.T.A.L.K.E.R from the first game, and after he tells you that, canonically, he kind of killed the scientists and there's nothing to contain the zone anymore, everyone realizes it's time to get the fuck out of here. The ending section of each Stalker game universally sucks dick. Holy shit, let me go through narrow corridors where everyone is armed with futuristic hit scan energy weapons that kill you if they hug your little toe. Hey, you can also keep replaying dialogue from the Wish Granter on repeat every few seconds. What an amazing, unforgettable experience, which I wish I never had. Once you reach the Chernobyl National Power Plant, do yourself a favor and format your hard drive, because that's going to be a much more fun experience than anything still in store for you. And while the rest of the game is universally enjoyable, there is one exception. Clear Skies. Most people abandon Clear Skies because it probably has the worst introduction to any game ever made. You start the game and get dumped in a shitty swamp, equipped with guns that can shoot for 3 meters before the bullets enter another quantum reality and vanish forever. At some
Okay, so 3 meters is a little short for a weapon, but I will say that real pistols are just not that effective inside of about 100 meters. They lose momentum, and they lose a lot of their kinetic energy. And as we discussed, bullets or pistols don't get that much, they don't have that many twists in the barrel. So there's not a ton of rotation on that bullet as it leaves, meaning that it will very quickly lose its kinetic energy and begin to travel through the air like this. And once it starts to tumble, then it's not only losing momentum due to air friction, but it's losing velocity, which means that if it does hit you at a certain point, it may just be slightly annoying. Now, that isn't to say that you should go stand 100 meters from your buddy with a 9mm and find out what happens. No, because there's no guarantees, right? Things, sometimes you just get lucky. The physics just work out right, and that bullet just has just the perfect velocity. It never really loses its momentum, right? So you have the maximum range, which is the longest it can theoretically travel, and then you have the effective range, and that's usually like a third or less of that distance. So the point is, 10 meters is a little unrealistic, but it's not unrealistic to sit there and say, hey, a poorly manufactured weapon with not a lot of power and a really short barrel may actually not have that lethal around, especially given that you're hunting animals who, even if they have a lethal wound, may not die for days, hours. So, and may still be fully effective before they finally succumb to the wound.
At one point, you'll have to leave a shitty swamp. You might be tempted to fight the 2 billion bandits that procreate in the warehouses. You might even be tempted to take the exit shown on the map. Both of those will result in your death. Taking the indicated exit will put you right next to a military cordon where a machine gun will shred you to pieces. No, the correct thing to do is ignore the swamp, enter the cordon, see the machine gun, fuck off back to the swamp, and take the new exit, which is safely north of your original one. If you have the 200 plus IQ necessary to get past that rough beginning, Clear Skies is probably the hardest of the three. The game does not give a shit how much it throws at you, but holy fuck, it has some of the best and most drawn out firefights I've ever experienced in a single player shooter. Of course,
That is a lot of rounds coming out of that shotgun.
in terms of atmosphere, the first game really set the tone. It's never too much, it's just the right dose of Soviet-era depression bleeding into your senses. Just keep in mind that the base game took a billion patches to actually run stably half the time. Smacking
Dark.
mods on top of that is just asking for trouble. XR engine is an engine that may work one day and blue screen the next. Its internal workings
It sounds like it is a very Soviet game mounted on an even more Soviet game.
are a subject of speculation and mystery, even to the Ukrainian computer engineers who originally coded it using Microsoft Paint on Windows Bandera. The engine is sensitive, fragile, and fickle, and if it really completely stops working, I recommend you roll back your NVIDIA drivers, which somehow magically fixes everything. I understand that this is the most poorly structured and ill-advised review I've ever made, but I thoroughly recommend every S.T.A.L.K.E.R game, and I especially recommend you to read Roadside Picnic. You can buy a copy of each game for about $1 a piece, and the English translation of the book is of course available online.
That is wild. Just gonna point this out. This seems like such a cool, creepy game,
For free.
honestly.
The game-
Let me know in the comments if you want me to stream some Stalker.
Games defy explanation, and capturing the feeling and tone of them is not something you can recreate by video alone. It's a lot of fun, and well worth experiencing at least once in your life. And if you've already experienced it, well, there's still
I mean, the nice thing is if you're like making a game where the whole world appears to be loaded with bugs, then no one's going to notice your own game's bugs. They're just going to add to the spookiness. Like that car being lifted off spontaneously. Seems like either a bug or a real problem.
Still more mods out there than you can play in a single, natural lifespan. As always, more content to come, so stay tuned. That content will be better structured. A warm thank you.
Nice. Guys, thanks so much for joining me. Hit subscribe if you haven't. And remember, if you want me to break down some real-world combat videos that are just a little too spicy for YouTube, you want to become a member of the Patreon. Thanks to our Lieutenant tier patrons. I'll see you in the next one.